Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're really excited that you're joining us today. My name is Tiffany Hanson. I'm with Luna Language Services, and I'm going to let Megan Nail here with FirstPerson get us started.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm Megan Nail with FirstPerson Advisors. And again, thank you and welcome. We're excited to have this engaging discussion around mental health and personal safety in light of COVID and all of the changes we have all experienced. So we are joined today by Amy Adelaide from Krieg DeVault, Kelly Mcbride from the Domestic Violence Network, and Kimball Richardson from Community Health Network. And they're going to introduce themselves and share their background here shortly. But before we get started, we want this to be an interactive and engaging discussion that answers some of the questions that you may have on your mind for yourself and for your team members, and just for the community. So we encourage you to use the Q&A function within Zoom. Tiffany will be keeping her eye on the Q&A and will be jumping in to share those questions with our panel so that we can, again, provide you with the information you need. So we'll go around our virtual room today and do some introductions to get us started. So Tiffany, I'll turn it over to you first.
So again, my name is Tiffany Hanson. My pronouns are she and her. I work with Luna Language Services. If you're not familiar with Luna, Luna is a translation and interpretation company. You can see Naomi here. Naomi is our ASL interpreter for the day to make sure that everyone can access the content of this program. I was really excited to partner with Megan and FirstPerson on this event. Luna does a lot of work with employers to ensure that all resources and all support, all opportunities are accessible to employees no matter the language that they utilize. We also do a lot of work with nonprofits like the Domestic Violence Network, law firms like Krieg DeVault, and mental health care providers like Community Health Network to ensure that all resources are accessible to all people. So I was excited to be a part of this, driving this conversation today.
Thank you, Tiffany. And again, I'm Megan Nail. I'm a Vice President of Total Rewards at FirstPerson. We're a benefits and compensation consulting firm. And similar to Luna, we have many shared values around inclusion and diversity and really assisting employers with being the best, most inclusive employers they can be. And we feel really passionately about topics like these. So next, I'll turn it over to Amy Adelaide from Krieg DeVault.
Right, thanks, Megan. I'm Amy Adelaide. I'm a partner at Krieg DeVault, where I lead our labor and employment law practice group. I've been practicing in employment law for about 19 years now and handled both employment litigation as well as the daily HR advice that employers are seeking, especially in these very unique and challenging times. I've spent the last 3 months advising employers on all sorts of COVID-related issues and return to work and safety plans. So really looking forward to today's discussion.
Great, thank you so much for joining us, Amy. Kimball Richardson from Community Health Network, I'll turn it over to you next. Kimball, you're on mute.
No, I'm not, right? Thank you. Kimball Richardson from Community Health Network. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and we're a large healthcare organization based in Indiana, serving about 9 counties, 5 acute care hospitals, and about 200 sites of care. We have probably the largest behavioral health program in the state. So large inpatient and outpatient programs.
Great, thank you so much, Kimball. And Kelly Mcbride from the Domestic Violence Network.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kelly Mcbride. I'm the Executive Director of the Domestic Violence Network. At the Domestic Violence Network, our mission is to change the culture that leads to domestic violence through advocacy, education, and collaboration. We do our work in those 3 buckets. So we work very collaboratively with all sorts of agencies, nonprofit, for-profit, government, and whatnot, to ensure that victims are safe and perpetrators are held accountable for their actions. We do training with adults and with our youth to prevent domestic violence from occurring in the first place, and then advocacy on the local level. So we're excited to be here today. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. All right, let's dive into our content for today. So for many of us, coronavirus or COVID has been the most significant and perhaps the most traumatic experience of our lives. We have unemployment at record rates, remote work for a broad population at a really high and intense level. For a lot of time over the past 3 months, we haven't had the option to leave our remote office. We have kids and caregiving responsibilities while we're trying to work. We also have fear and safety concerns for those who are essential and who are going to a physical workplace and have continued to do so throughout this crisis. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think I feel that, and many of us do, as we navigate reopening, as this has continued to unfold with really no firm end in sight. And really, this whole crisis has been impossible to ignore, as it's changed the way we live and work and really has affected virtually every element of our lives. So just to start off, I would love to hear from each of you your perspective on this and how you have seen this crisis impact your work and the work of the clients that you serve. So maybe Kimball, I'll start with you and your perspective.
Well, I have an interest in fashion, and that has something to do with my story, because I thought perhaps like fashion does, it starts on the East and West Coast and kind of slowly the trends, right, move to the Midwest. But that's not what happened with the virus. I really thought we would have several months to get ready, and we didn't. So on March 6th of this year, Community Health Network was the first hospital in the state to receive a patient who had the virus. And my work as the manager of business development immediately stopped. And saying that, and ironically, I've never been busier in my professional career. So I was working 16, 18-hour days for weeks, including the weekends, working on 2 major projects. And I'm saying that because it put me in direct contact with our citizens of the state and in my own network. So I was the coordinator for our large in-network peer support program. We have about 80 people on the team. We have special training to learn how to emotionally support our own staff. And as you can imagine, we've had lots of people needing that support. So we're trying to keep people healthy and in service. We cannot afford emotionally or financially to lose our good people. And then I also just happened to be, at the time, the coordinator for the, we call it District 5, which is Marion County and the surrounding 7 counties here in Indiana, the Resilience and Emotional Support Team. It's a disaster mental health team, if you will. And in a weekend, we were given the task of forming a large response to what ultimately turned out to be about 6 missions, including being able to respond to provide emotional support to 911 dispatchers, 211 call operators, police, fire, and EMS all around the state, the Indiana State Department of Health, Indiana Department of Transportation, Indiana Department of Workforce Development, and the Indiana Department of Correction. So in all, there are about 25 organizations that were part of that task force, hundreds of volunteers. And people have been very challenged. But thankfully, we've been swift and had a rapid response to that, and it's been my honor and pleasure to be part of that.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And I think we can all agree that the pace in which this entire crisis developed is really astonishing. So thank you. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you for your perspective.
All right, so kind of unlike Kimball, where he thought we had time to prepare, I knew that we were going to go into lockdown, and that caused me a lot of anxiety, to be honest with you. But I thought it'd be over pretty quick. So I really thought we would be back up and running within a month. So hindsight's 2020, right? And that's pretty funny to think about now. So we kind of, as programming, we kind of sat for a minute until we realized, like, wait a second, we need to be able to carry on with our work. So we luckily were able to do everything virtually. And so our organization, we're forward facing and we work with the community. We don't work with victims of violence directly, per se, but we are able to transition everything online. But at the same time, talking with IMPD in the city of Indianapolis, we began to realize the increase of domestic violence calls was huge, up to 200% in some zip codes, and on an average 125% increase of domestic violence calls. So that spun DVN into action of how can we pull our network together to respond to this. So there have been some challenges for sure on how do you help and take care of the frontline workers as they're taking care of the victims. And it's we've seen some good things. We have some we've done some mental health care for them and providing them with care packages, the advocates, so that they can continue to do their work, and just trying to get creative in the different ways that we do that stuff.
Thanks, Kelly. That's some really disturbing but astonishing statistics that you just shared too about the magnitude of the crisis that we have on that front as well with domestic violence. Amy, I'll turn it over to you for your perspective.
Sure. So as I said earlier, I've kind of spent the last few months advising employers on how to handle COVID-related issues, including the unfortunate need for furloughs and layoffs, the new Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which fortunately provided some paid leave for employees dealing with COVID-related illnesses. Also, certainly unemployment and all of the changes we were seeing there in relation to COVID and the increase or the addition of the federal unemployment, remote work issues, also creating safety plans then for employers as they started to think about reopening. I think that's something that's interesting that I've observed in helping employers with all of these different phases is that, it seemed at the outset of this, we were all focused on physical health, right? We were focused on people not getting sick. And then our focus turned to, okay, now we need to figure out how we continue our businesses, right? How we continue to function. And then we turned to return to work and making our workplaces safe so that people could begin coming back. And I feel like now our fourth step, and probably should have been along with step number one, is thinking about these issues of mental health, right? That many of you likely in your jobs were focusing on the mental health component. But, as I watch, the articles coming out and webinars and so forth, this is the focus, and hopefully something we'll learn from this experience is putting mental health back at step one, when we're dealing with a crisis situation like this. So just some things that I've observed.
Great, thank you, Amy. So let's dive into this a little bit more specifically. So Kelly, to put this question to you first, so how has this crisis specifically affected individuals with volatile or unsafe home environments?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That's kind of a tricky question. I think one thing we need to know to begin with is domestic violence is about power and control. So not every relationship that has some rough edges is going to be domestic violence, right? Because it's about that power and control and maintaining that power and control. But what we do know is that IMPD was called out on an average of 125% more to mitigate these disputes, these domestic disputes that were happening. We also know that our shelters are completely full, that they have to social distance, right? So they were full to begin with before this even happened. And now we have to social distance. So they're at 50% capacity. And that's even less people that they can take in, but there are more people who are needing home. So one of the things that we've done is we set up a hotel fund to be able to pay for a hotel for 2 to 4 weeks for an individual who is in a volatile home environment. There's screening to make sure that this is about power control, that this is domestic violence. They're put into a hotel. They're given wraparound services with mental health counseling, safety planning, and how do we get them into permanent housing and away from their abuser. So COVID did not cause domestic violence, and it certainly didn't cause it to increase, but I think it exacerbated the problem quite a bit, and that we're seeing more people reach out for help because they're not able to go to their work for escape or go to school for escape and have that alone time there. They're stuck at home in quarantine, and we're seeing the emotions rise and whatnot. So that's really what we're seeing, and trying to figure out how do we continue to help victims of domestic violence in this unprecedented time when we can't see them in person, they can't come to shelter, and what does that look like right now?
Great points, Kelly. Kimball, how have you seen this crisis impact those with volatile or unsafe home environments in different ways?
So I think in the very beginning, we concentrated on just helping people get into action mode. Right at the start of this, people either had to find jobs or they had to just go to a job that was scary because we didn't understand the virus and didn't know how we could keep ourselves safe necessarily. But then in those of us in behavioral health kind of predicted this as well. After people kind of get out of that action mode, which is after a couple of months, then they're like, well, why am I depressed now? Why wasn't I depressed right at the beginning? Well, sometimes emotions have to catch up, because when we're in do mode, our behavioral health and sometimes our emotions take a back seat. And sometimes that's appropriate. Okay. I don't want you to say that's wrong. Sometimes that's appropriate, but not everybody knows how to. Let me say this in a different way, that there's lots of smart people, but not everybody's psychologically sophisticated. So in other words, we don't often think about our mental health. We don't practice it. Resiliency techniques are skills. That's a good thing for most of us because skills can be learned. But skills and techniques work better when we practice. So when is the best time to practice not being anxious or to use those skills? It's when we're not anxious, okay? So just like what Amy said, if we put these issues at the forefront now versus waiting until we're in a crisis, it's going to be a lot better. There's things we can do when people are in crisis, but putting the skills in and being purposeful about them. So I think it's important that as employers, we have purposeful discussions about behavioral health and our emotions. And that used to be kind of a taboo subject. It was like, well, look, your personal problems, you need to leave those at home. When you come to work, you need to do your job. And but resilience is a little different, I think, than that. I think people are getting that message, thankfully.
Great, thanks, Kimball. And kind of diving into that a little bit more, maybe Kimball, I'll stick with you on this topic to start. But what have some of those specific effects been that you have seen on mental health, both individually and then in the workplace? We've heard a lot about isolation, loneliness, anxiety, substance abuse, financial stress. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen?
Well, all that, what you just said, absolutely. It's 100% true. And Kelly was spot on with her statistics. I heard the same. You know, we've had 100 and some percent increase in calls about suicide from our local hotlines, over 400% calls about domestic violence issues to some of our hotlines. And so we're trying to put some things into place to help with those situations. So we know that those are issues. Anxiety, you know, the three big ones I would say are sleep, food, and concentration. People don't have good sleep hygiene. People either are not eating enough or overeating, and you can't concentrate. You know, and it's a little bit more like, where did I put my keys? But, you know, what was I going to say? And I can't focus and I can't get my things done. Like, you know, if you're used to being like that and I can multitask and give me 2 or 3 projects, no problem, people feel a little slowed down and sluggish. And that's to be expected. Those things will come back. But helping people understand that most of these things are time limited. So that's good. But in between time, if you don't work on it or fix it, it can turn into a bigger problem and can get, you know, as bad like with domestic violence or even suicide. That's why we can't ignore it.
Great, thank you. Kelly, do you have anything to add on some of the mental health effects that you've seen throughout your work?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think it's important to know that anxiety manifests itself in different ways. So with depression, it's very almost, I don't want to say clear cut, but it's kind of clear cut. You know, you sleep too much, you don't sleep enough, you know, that sort of thing. But with anxiety, that can manifest as anger and yelling and screaming. And so to Kimball's point, if you don't know how to manage that anxiety, or you're not even aware that you have the anxiety, that's going to come out as very hostile and can scare the people around you, where really you don't know how to control yourself at that point. And I think that's a very big distinction between what we call domestic violence versus like a hostile living environment. That doesn't mean that these people who aren't super anxious might not hurt someone, but it's going to be it's tricky to talk about, I guess, as a domestic violence provider. But just knowing that anxiety can come out as anger, and trying to help that person calm themselves down if you're in the position to do so, if it's safe for you. If you're not safe, then you need to leave. Absolutely. But I think that that's really important, just working through my own anxiety and realizing that it manifested that way. I was able to control it better, and then now it just manifests as, I'm losing my mind. Anyway, that's all.
Do you mind if I comment on that too, Kelly? And this is something that we teach other people, but about a month in to the pandemic that we were dealing with, I was asked to give a presentation about state licensing issues. I currently happen to be the president of our state licensing board. So I was giving a presentation to graduate students at a local university. This is all virtual, of course. And it's not like it's a dry topic, right? It's something that they're interested in, but it's kind of a dry topic. So we were done. It's about an hour presentation. And I said, hey, thanks so much, guys, for having me here. And I busted out crying. I'm like, what in the H is wrong with me? You know, the students were like, Mr. Richardson, are you okay? I'm like, give me a minute to get it together. And the next morning at our morning task force meeting, I said, guys, these are leaders of state organizations. So I was feeling a little vulnerable in asking this question, but I said, let me tell you about something that just happened to me yesterday. Are you guys feeling weepy? Are you guys busting out crying and doing strange stuff? And they just started laughing. They're like, yeah, Kimball, it's happening to all of us, man. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. I didn't feel crazy. And just knowing that those things are, and this, I teach this, okay? But when it happens to you, sometimes it's interesting. So knowing that you're not the only one, knowing that it's normal and even expected to have some reactions. If you didn't, you wouldn't be human. So we've been in extraordinarily pressurized situations, and most of us will be fine, but we'll have moments of not being okay.
That's a great point. Thanks for sharing that personal story. I can definitely relate. I've had my moments of unexpected tears throughout all this. So good to hear I'm not alone. Kimball, I'll keep it with you for a second. We've talked about some of the challenging mental health circumstances that many of us have faced throughout this pandemic. Are there any positive effects that you've noticed or heard of throughout your work that have really been positive through this?
You know, the interesting thing is, yes, we had no time to dilly-dally, okay? And sometimes in our world, prior to the pandemic, and we'd have to think about starting a program or whatnot, and we got a lot of people's opinions and had meetings about it. No time for that. We had to make decisions very quickly. And sometimes we would stand up whole programs, sometimes in just a couple of days. And it's amazing when you get people together and you can focus what you can accomplish. So that was good. I wouldn't say I was not a fan of virtual communication before, but I just didn't use it a lot. You know, everything that we had ever done on our support teams and task force and whatnot have been in person. And we were told, no, Kimball, you can't do that right now. Everything has to be virtual, everything. So all of the support we've done in the last 4 months has been virtual. And, you know, would it have been better if it would have been in person? Maybe, but it worked. And it worked pretty darn well. So I think, you know, we'll go back to a hybrid. Sometimes it'll be virtual if we need to, and sometimes not. But virtual's not bad, and it can work.
Great, thank you. So Amy, let's turn to you. We've heard about all of these mental health issues, safety issues, and everything that is going on with each individual. And as employees, they're bringing all of this into the workplace. So what have kind of you seen about changing dynamics in the workplace and how employers have navigated these situations?
So I think something that has risen to the surface is the importance of the role of the employer and how the employer is maybe playing a larger role in so many different areas of employees' lives than maybe they have before. You know, employees have had a lot of anxiety about issues from finances to personal safety in the office to personal safety at home to how they can work given their childcare situation. And as far as dealing with these challenges, I think it's critical for employers to think about what resources they can provide to their employees that maybe they hadn't thought about before. You know, I know most employers, or a lot of employers, have an EAP program. Now is absolutely the time to review that program, dig into what it really offers, and educate employees on this really important employee benefit that they have available to them, and really trying to take away the stigma from relying on those resources that are available to employees, seeking assistance with mental health issues. With respect to concerns we've talked about isolation and loneliness, I think we've seen employers trying to increase and make mandatory, the virtual technology with, Zoom meetings like these. I've heard over and over about the value of seeing another person's face, right? And that helping with that loneliness or isolation feeling. So, relying on the Zoom meetings such as this when we can't be face to face. I think employers also are thinking about those populations within their employees who may be particularly stressed, right? And each organization kind of needs to do that self-assessment to say, okay, which groups of our employees may need some extra outreach right now, whether it be those who are over 65, right, and feeling particularly isolated, those who are furloughed, right, and the stresses that they may be feeling, essential workers, how they're feeling about having to continue to work, what special stresses are they experiencing, or stressors, healthcare workers, obviously, and the demands that have been placed upon them. And then finally, those in vulnerable populations who, may not be able to, return to work at this point. So just kind of, I've seen employers doing this and handling these challenges by really taking a look at their own organizations and think about what can we do, or what do we need to do to provide additional resources to these particular groups within our organization.
Great, thank you, Amy. So as an HR professional, I know I feel the strain of trying to balance privacy along with empathy and concern with engaging with employees on these really sensitive issues. So Amy, what advice do you have for employers on how to be empathetic in engaging, but also be respectful of employees' privacy?
Yeah, this is an area that's very challenging because we have this federal law out there called the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we have similar state and local laws, and those laws are great, but they also put restrictions on the questions that employers can be asking their employees about their medical situation. So, unless an employee has approach the employer to say, I have this medical condition and I need X, I need time off, or I'm struggling to perform this part of my job because I have this medical condition. Unless you have the employee, being the one to provide that information, there are pretty significant limits under the ADA on asking employees medical questions. So what I think that employers can do is show employees that they're there to support them, show them the resources that are available to them, as I mentioned earlier, for example, through an EAP. I think it's also critical for employers, and particularly leadership, to acknowledge that many employees are afraid, are worried, are anxious, so that maybe they're more willing to come forward and say, you know what, I need some help here, and not feeling like they're alone in doing that. Employers can certainly survey employees about how they're feeling about coming back to work, such as, are you feeling okay about coming back to work? Yes or no? Do you have concerns? Yes or no? So that you're not specifically asking medical questions, but more kind of open-ended, so that hopefully employees who are feeling anxious or have a medical concern will bring that forward.
Great, thank you, Amy. So as we have heard from some of the statistics, particularly Kelly, that you shared, we know that the likelihood is we have employees in our organizations who are faced with domestic violence or volatile or unsafe home environments. So Kelly, I'll throw it to you maybe first on this. What are some specific ways that employers can help support those employees who may be facing these situations?
Sure, absolutely. So first, we do offer a training on that, a full 1 hour training. So, and it's free. Reach out to me if you would like your organization to have that. But I would say creating a culture in your organization where you can come forward and disclose that, because as Amy said, you can't just walk up to someone and say, so are you in a domestic violence relationship? Like, that's not okay. But there are things you can look out for, which might be a little tricky during this time, but attendance issues, coming in late, maybe somebody who's very tired all the time, bruises, of course, wearing clothing that's not seasonal, so turtlenecks in the summertime, that sort of thing. But just letting the employee know that the door is open and that there are resources available. If you have HR, to connect them to HR, having us come out and do an all staff training to show that you are committed to combating domestic violence. Also, a employee is more likely to disclose to someone they eat lunch with than they are to their supervisor. So what do you do with that information once it's disclosed? So those are certain things that you can look for. If someone does disclose to you, it's very important that you believe them, first and foremost, and that you work with an advocate as much as you can, because they'll have all this information. But if the employee does not want to work with an advocate, set up a safety plan. You can Google those and find them online, or we have brochures that lead you through them. Have a check-in situation with the employee if they're comfortable with that. So if they do call off of work, having someone call just to make sure that they're okay. Having the picture of the abuser at the front desk, so they're not allowed to just come in. Excessive calls is another one too. So having someone else pick up their phones or screen their calls for them. So there are a lot of different ways to show support. I think the trickiest part is getting someone to disclose it to you so that you can help. So creating that culture in your work environment is so important, and that culture can encompass mental health and domestic violence and substance abuse and a no shame, no blame type atmosphere. And it's just so important, because you spend more time at work than you do at home. So having that culture is just detrimental to people's mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Amy, do you have anything you want to add on how employers can help support employees who may be in challenging home environments?
Yeah, so I mean, in addition to everything Kelly said, which was really helpful, one thing employers are doing is trying to get employees back into the workplace, right? And trying to do so safely. So I think it's a matter of telling employees everything you're doing to create as safe of a workplace for them as possible. So I think that's part of it. And I think the other part is, Kelly's talking about culture. And I'm hopeful that after all of this, employees may see HR in a new way, right? That employees will view HR more as, employee advocates, not just disciplinarians, right? And that they'll understand that HR is there to provide these resources for them, and is that group they can go to with these concerns, and that there's going to be help on the other side, right? That when they do take those concerns to HR, they're going to find it to be a valuable, worthwhile exercise. And so just making sure that as HR professionals, we're armed with information to help employees who do come forward, so that they'll continue to come forward. So I think that'll be something really important as we come out of this.
Great, thanks, Amy. I agree. HR can play a really important role in fostering those connections. So something that we've talked about quite a bit, and Kimball, I'm actually going to turn it to you, and so you can add to this, but is how we can foster connection within a community and within each other. So Kimball, I'll let you go ahead and jump in on that and anything you wanted to add.
Thank you. Well, yes, I did turn an extra light on. So this is a pretty cool thing about these things. You know, I was texting my wife, would you come in here and turn a light on? I'm kind of dark. It's hard to see my face. So if you noticed the difference, hopefully. We had a really cool thing that we put together for one of the organizations that we were missioned to here in Indianapolis, one of the call centers that were taking calls about the coronavirus. Their staff were not trained to take emotional calls necessarily. They could take calls for information. But, you know, when people are upset, they need a different kind of listening skill. And these were people who had, you know, been on the job maybe 5 months or less. They were very stressed. They were talking about leaving. And these are a call center that was used to getting about 2,000 calls a day that now, at their highest, we're getting about 25,000 calls a day. This is a 24/7 service. So that was part of what our task force was asked to do. And we put together we called it a quick check-in model, so that before each shift, the staff were put into small groups of 6 or less people. We had 2 facilitators per group, and we decided one would be a mental health professional, one would be a peer, which means somebody that was trained, in this case, somebody that was trained specifically in substance use issues, so that we could be on the lookout for that too. And we had a series of 4 questions that we'd ask each person, and we did this in 30 minutes. So you have to teach people how to respond and how to do it, and how to answer the questions. But we decided we would do this twice a week for a month. And by the end of the 3rd week, the staff were, I'm not saying this to sound dramatic, but begging us to keep doing it because it was so helpful. And they didn't feel alone. They felt like they got good coping skills and resiliency training. And here's the other cool thing, is leadership decided that this would be paid time. So everybody could do this. You know, they had a little bit extra added onto their shift in some cases because of the staggering of how a 24/7 operation works. But you didn't have to do this on your own time. And now people were expected, they weren't mandated, but they were expected to attend. This is part of being at work. This is part of building your resiliency. They weren't made, but they of course weren't forced to talk, but guess what? Everybody talked. And it worked out really, really well. And then other organizations and other counties around Indiana now started hearing about it and wanting that kind of training and things for their staff too. So it's been pretty cool. And we collected data too. We haven't analyzed it or published it yet, but so we're trying to make it so that other people could learn how to do it.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Kelly, any thoughts on fostering connection during this time, or anything that you've seen that's worked well in this way?
So just some things that we've done, that I've done with my staff, and then my staff have done with the advocates who are frontline. So in April, we normally hold a self-care retreat for our advocates. They're overworked and they're underpaid. So it's a day of self-care. We pamper them. We bring in some speakers to talk about self-care. They usually do like an art project. We have massages, lunch, just like time to relax and unwind, and they're paid for it. Usually their employer lets them come and not have to take a day off. So obviously we weren't able to do that this year, but we still wanted to do something like that. So we wrote them all just short little notes about how important they are to the community and how much we appreciate them. And whatever we would have spent on that advocacy retreat, we put that into a gift card so that they can pamper themselves, and do what they want to do. And then for my staff, my sister actually did this for me. It was a create your own bouquet. So you get the flowers, they're delivered to you, but you put the flowers together in the bouquet. And I was like, that's a great idea because it's self-care, it's using creativity, and that sort of thing. So I did that for my staff and had that sent to each of their houses, probably about in the middle of this. Some of my staff have to isolate alone, and so I know that can be super lonely. So just something to like brighten their day. I know that it's just really, this is hard for them. And I care about each one of them, and I want them to not only perform well for work, but have a good overall work-life balance and feel good about themselves. So I know not everybody can do something like that, but I think even just a handwritten note or quick email even from your supervisor, thanks so much. I know this is hard right now, but you're doing a great job. Especially if people around you are being furloughed or laid off, like that's really scary. So just having that extra communication and reaching out.
Great. Thank you so much. Great ideas. I hadn't heard of the bouquet idea, so I love that. Yeah. Amy, are there things that you've seen from the employer side that employers are doing to foster connections between their employees?
Sure. So I think bottom line is people want to feel like they matter, right? Employees want to feel like they matter. So some things that I've seen employers doing is just simply having a telephone call. Depending on the size of your organization, whether that's your president/CEO reaching out by phone to every single employee to say, how are you doing? Any concerns, anything we can be doing better, or if that's somebody else in management or your senior leadership team. So just having that personal connection one-on-one by telephone with your employees. As I said earlier, also the live video meetings are a great way to remain connected. Even though we might have to actually get out of our comfy clothes and PJs and look presentable for just a couple of hours or shorter, it really is good for people to connect in that way, and tell the kids to be quiet and try to get the dog to be quiet and all of those things. But I think those things have also given us more realistic expectations that it's okay. If something like that happens, or your child runs in the middle of your webinar or your work call, or your dog's barking, etc. So I think there have been some good changes that I think will continue on. But those are some of the examples that I've seen in terms of the phone calls, the video meetings. Just trying to, and I think also, leaders within an organization sharing their own challenges and stories about, things that have affected them going through this, so that people feel like, okay, I'm not the only one who's feeling this way, just like, Kimball shared his example, and understanding that, this isn't normal for anyone. So.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Tiffany, I want to pause and see if we have any questions from our audience.
Yeah, we have a few. So the first one that came in, I'm actually really at the beginning of the conversation, so I know it's something they just want to make sure that that gets addressed through the conversation. How do we help to prevent or reduce depression when working from home? So I don't know, maybe Kimball, I know you mentioned some skills earlier that you can learn for resiliency. Maybe you want to mention a few of those or go through some tactics you've seen folks using.
Yeah, so there's, of course, as you would probably suspect, there's a difference between someone who has what we would call a clinical depression, which could need possibly medication assistance or professional counseling, and someone who needs some, you may not need that level of care. And so it's important that you have good open dialogues with your family and your friends so that they can tell you, it's not other times, most times other people can see it in you before you can see it in yourself. And being open to hearing concerns from other people, reaching out to your family doctor, and then if needed to professional counselors. But, I use some apps that help me with breathing techniques. And these are, one is called Breathe to Relax, and one is called Tactical Breathing. So if you want to, I'm saying quote, air quotes, right? If you want to sell breathing techniques to certain populations, you put a cool name in front of it, like tactical breathing, and they can accept it, right? So they'll practice it. But if you really want to practice mindfulness, and sometimes it really just takes 10 or 15 seconds to do that, to get yourself centered, to not feel as anxious, and to remind yourself what's important right here in the moment. So these different techniques, and if you do them at prescribed times throughout the day, you practice and build up those skills, and then you normally and can naturally decrease your blood pressure, be more aware of when you're just starting to feel anxious or sad, upset, angry, etc. So then it doesn't blow up. You can catch it earlier.
Thank you. So another question actually that I had earlier, and it's come up a few times already, and just came up again recently, thinking about vulnerability with our team members. And I think that it's important, especially like from Amy's standpoint, and from Kimball's standpoint on both sides, and even Kelly with disclosure, like thinking about like, where's the line between what's healthy sharing? How do you be vulnerable without crossing a line? Do you have any tips about things that you should or shouldn't share with your employees to create that safe space, to create some vulnerability for people to connect? And maybe Amy, we can start with you.
Sure. I think it's okay, certainly legally okay to share your own struggles, your own experiences, as long as you're not making other people feel like they have to do the same in return, right? That you're not expecting, people to kind of go around the room and say, well, I'm experiencing this, that it's more, you're trying to do it to make people realize they're not alone in feeling the way that they're feeling. So certainly sharing your own struggles or experiences is okay. But again, like I said, not making other people feel like they have to do the same and putting them on the spot to do so.
Kimball, how about you? Any suggestions for that? Oh, you're muted, friend.
Thank you. About a year ago, I met a new person, and we started having a conversation. They were a neighbor, okay? So it was a casual conversation. In the first sentence, this is very dramatic, okay? But he said, so, Kimball, how do you feel about abortion? Okay, now, I'm telling you this as an example. That's not okay. Okay, that's way too soon. It's okay to bring up that topic, but that's inappropriate to do that quickly. And so what I like to help people with is the art of, I call it coffee table chit chat. So there is an art to conversation, and you want to dip your toe in the pool before you make a big splash when you reveal personal information. So check out whether this is a safe person, it's an appropriate topic, can they keep confidence? And you start out with little information first. And if the conversation is a nice flow of back and forth, if the other person is, sharing some things about themselves, If it's too much too soon, that's probably a little bit of a red flag. On the other end, if they don't share anything about themselves but want to know everything about you, that's a red flag too. So there's a nice happy medium in between, and those skills, it's a skill and you can be taught. And it's a lunch and learn you can have at your organization.
And Kelly, how about you? Maybe vulnerability and creating a safe space and sharing with people if you are concerned that maybe they have some challenges at home. How do you create that space so that they feel comfortable?
Yeah. So when you started this conversation, it reminded me of a great book called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. And she talks about vulnerability and using it in leadership and how it is absolutely appropriate. So I think, as Kimball said, there are times where too much too soon is not okay. But if you're trying to build trust and rapport with someone, you have to be vulnerable with them, or else the trust isn't going to be there. They're just going to look at you as part of the establishment or someone who's just there. So, again, we don't work directly with victims or abusers of domestic violence, but just being vulnerable with my staff and then allowing them to be vulnerable back creates the culture that I want to have too, that they can come and say, I'm having mental health challenges right now. I need a personal day off, or I'm in a domestic violence relationship. So the vulnerability leads to that, being able to have those disclosures. But Dare to Lead, great book, highly recommend it.
I've read that book and it is super fabulous.
Yeah, I gave my copy away. I was just looking at my bookshelf. I have to buy another one.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Kelly, because that's one of the things we tell, and I know we're almost out of time here, but we tell our physicians oftentimes is they sometimes don't want to come to the debriefing meetings that we have because they don't want to look vulnerable to the other staff. And I said, I'm telling you right now, it will be 100% the opposite. They will look up to you even more. And it will be more powerful if you share your concerns and your emotional reactions. And in 100% of the cases, that's been true. And I've been doing this for 30 years. So
You have a little experience. So the last one was really more of a statement than a question, but I think it can roll into, I know Megan's kind of last question about resources. The statement is, I've seen companies whose HR departments do not serve employees. They are only meant to save the company money at expense of employees. And they included examples of no increase in wages or time off, no promotions, no performance-based incentives, etc. So maybe turning that statement into a question, if someone is working in an HR department that doesn't feel fully supported, maybe what resources can folks access that are little to no cost, or what are some ways that they can provide support? So.
Yeah, Amy, do you want to take that one just in general? And then we'll go to Kelly and Kimball as well, but just resources that are out there either for HR professionals or employees specifically.
I mean, as far as HR professionals, I encourage collaboration with other organizations and figure out what they are doing that they're finding is working with their employees. Whether that's through reaching out to other organizations that you view as your competitors, and having lunch or having a virtual meeting, I guess now, and saying, you know what, let's do some valuable group think here in terms of what can we share with each other about what we offer to our employees, and what have they found to be beneficial. But also, I mean, there are lots of more formal organizations out there that you can go to and figure those things out as well. SHRM as an example, and others where, just reaching out to other HR professionals and seeing what those resources are that you can make available, and how you can make your employees' experience with HR even better is really, my best piece of advice.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Kimball and Kelly, just other resources. I know you've both mentioned a few, but just resources you would suggest. Kelly, if you want to start.
I really just have, besides Brene Brown, anything she's written, to tag team off of Kimball, Headspace, the app Headspace. It's a meditation app and it's amazing. There's so many different guided meditation apps. I've been using it so long I don't even need it anymore, but I still like to listen to it. But there's a free version and then there's a $15.99 a month version, and it's worth every penny. And I will say that has made just tremendous improvements in my mood and how I react to stress.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And Kimball, we'll end with you. What resources would you recommend?
The state of Indiana, the Indiana Mental Health, the Division of Mental Health and Addiction created a website called bewellindiana.org, bewellindiana.org. And it on the website, it's information about how to stay healthy and well regarding the pandemic, but really it's skills for anything and any time. And I think it was really well done. I'm in one of the videos, so watch the video about grief. And that reminds me, grief. Some of us have lost loved ones during this time, and there is a virtual grief support that got started at my organization, and people from all over the country and the world have joined in on it. And it's for, there's regular bereavement support groups, and there are some specific just to people who have died because of COVID-19. And so that's a resource as well. You can go to ecommunity.com/grief, ecommunity.com/grief to get that information.
Thank you so much. That's an important reminder to this whole discussion. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you to all of our panelists, Amy, Kelly, Kimball, and also Tiffany and Naomi for your help today. It was a really valuable and enriching discussion, and I hope it really helps us think about our interactions with others and inclusion in our workplaces during this uncertain time. So as we said at the beginning, we will be emailing out the recording as well as the additional resources that were just mentioned and mentioned throughout. And so we look forward to your feedback. So thanks again and have a great day. Be safe and be well.